Good morning. It's philosophy time. Today I'm going to be reading a selection from a book on Hinduism goddesses. It, just so you know, in the future, anytime something is religiously specific, I will just use terms like the divine, God, and the universe, since I believe that we all believe in the same power, the same divine, the same God. We set ourselves up for suffering when we take our roles to be our identities. With each role, we compartmentalize who we are, trying to fit our identities into our knowledge of the roles. If I take myself to be a mother, my happiness is dependent on my knowledge of what good mothering is, which I pick up from my family, society, and culture. It may not fit in with how the role is defined in other families, societies, and cultures. Moreover, when I take myself to be a mother, my happiness will rest upon my children. When they succeed, I feel validated. And if they don't, I blame myself. They feel guilty when they are unhappy because they see that it makes me unhappy. My role as a mother constricts not just me, but also my children because they are not even given the freedom to be unhappy. I create karma by entangling them in my attachments and versions that become deeply rooted for all of us. Constriction from knowledge also affects our progress on the spiritual path. Becoming identified as a spiritual person is just as constricting as taking ourselves to be a certain gender, race, nationality, style, or role. Importantly, the knowledge we acquire on the spiritual path can remain secular, where we can know everything about the self. The constricting power of spiritual knowledge can be like knowing everything about a strawberry without ever biting into one and reveling in its sweetness. Our knowledge about self as an object keeps us from realizing that it is who we really are. Instead of I self's sense of lack leads us to acquire more objects. Instead of material possessions, we chase spiritual knowledge. This is known as spiritual materialism, which is part of the shadow self. Chasing spiritual knowledge can make us lose touch with our immediate and always present experience of being grounded in the self, our true nature. The antidote of this shadow of constriction is to open up to light, where we surrender secular knowledge in favor of self-knowledge. In the Yoga Sutras, we are asked to cultivate the niyama of surrender to facilitate our progress along the spiritual path, which requires faith. Although faith is complete trust in the divine, it can manifest as a shadow. When we mistake our roles for who we are, our faith becomes a belief that is rooted in fear and hope. We believe that if we have faith, the divine will sustain our roles and save us from suffering, illness, and pain. We can feel that just because our faith is strong, we will be looked after preferentially. This kind of faith may be helpful initially to gain trust in a teaching. However, it can eventually lead to delusion and disappointment when the divine doesn't appear to keep up with its side of the bargain. We don't get what we want. Our suffering doesn't end, non-believers thrive, and we are afflicted with disease and pain. When faith is based on beliefs, it becomes an object of secular knowledge. When we say we believe something, there is at least a remote possibility that it may not be true. In contrast, when we know something to be true in direct experience, there is no need to believe it. Faith thus becomes surrender when beliefs give way to direct experience. The divine has no preferences because all of creation is his child. When we understand that the purpose of God's apparent separation is to playfully explore the infinite possibilities of its own nature, when this understanding seeps in, we begin to trust that all is well, even when things don't seem to be going our way. This trust opens us up to the light of surrender. What must we surrender? In one word, everything. On the path of ardent devotion, we cultivate the attitude that everything belongs to God, including our actions, choices, thoughts, and emotions. Nothing is ours, including our hopes and fears. We give up everything at the altar of God, including our greatest fears, our most shameful thoughts, and our worst habits. We never ask, why me? because we trust the divine. We take everything to come our way as a blessing of divine grace and even welcome suffering, sickness, and death as gifts that chisel away everything that doesn't serve us. To have this kind of faith is to not worry, and my will is surrendered to the divine will. Surrender is a challenge and goes against our grain because the ability to choose and control our lives is one of the most tenacious characteristics of the I self. Surrender is especially hard because we naturally value pleasure more than pain, and we tend to want to surrender what we don't like and keep what we like. This is why an important prerequisite of surrender is equanimity, where we take both pain and pleasure in stride. Embracing the light of non-clinging enables the light of surrender by facilitating the understanding that we are not the roles we play. To fully explore this, we need to step out of the play entirely and look at it from a different perspective. In Zen, this is called the backward step. When we remain firmly planted in awareness, we break free from the power of thoughts to cause pleasure or pain, aversion or attachment. To see how this works, picture a train station. Trains pull in, stop, stay until passengers get off and on, then leave again. Awareness is the train station, and thoughts are like trains. They arise, stay a while, and leave. No train stops permanently in a station, just as thoughts continually arise and subside in awareness. In this analogy, getting on the train is like believing a thought. It can take you to heaven filled with good feelings like happiness and satisfaction, or it can take you to a hell with bad feelings like anger, anxiety, and resentment. We ride some trains habitually, so they stop at the station more frequently, and we travel those routes more often. But if we remain at the station and never get on those trains, the train lines will eventually discontinue. To remain on the platform is to take the backward step. This is a powerful technique to cultivate equanimity. We can remain still and watch the impulse to hop onto thought trains. We can learn to watch thoughts non-judgmentally as they arise and subside. We see clearly that all thoughts, emotions, and events arise, last for a while, and subside. Nothing is permanent. We also see that thoughts are harmless in themselves, and they can't take us to heaven or hell unless we believe them. When we cultivate equanimity through the habit of non-reaction, surrender becomes a way of life. We clearly see that it's our resistance to what is that causes us to suffer. If I am ill, but believe that I shouldn't be, I am at odds with what is, which is divine will. When I question divine will, I display my arrogance that I know better than the divine. On the other hand, when I question my thoughts, I realize that the only problem here is my belief that I shouldn't be ill. In this realization, all is well as it is. By questioning my thoughts, I take the step back and surrender my will to divine will. I surrender my knowledge of what should be and open up to the light, the space of what is. When we practice the backward step, constricted labels that we use to define ourselves, such as I am man, I am worthy, give way to what lies prior to the arising of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. Any label that arises is seen as just a train stopping at the station, and as we remain non-judgmental and simply observe the label, it dissolves into awareness. We then become acquainted with awareness, our ground of being. By noticing that all phenomena are objects that temporarily arise and subside in awareness, we learn to discern the difference between them and awareness, the subject. With discernment, our attention begins to shift from objects to the subject. What looks through these eyes, hears through these ears? Can I find one that sees, hears, tastes, and feels? We see that every time we look for the subject, it can't be found. Anything we find in this exploration is still an object. We then realize that we cannot find the self. We can only be the self. To our amazement, we see that we have always been the self, but simply mistook the body-mind for it. When we learn to abide as the self, dude abides, we open to a vast inner spaciousness that is the result of unlearning and discarding our secular knowledge. The highest form of surrender is to stay loyal to the self. We don't hold on to any bits of knowledge, no matter how sacred. The fanciest of trains is still only a train. We find that our most cherished beliefs arise and subside in a vast spaciousness of awareness. In this self-abidance, the shadow of constriction is transmuted into the light of surrender. When we learn to abide in awareness, or self, we begin to relax and allow deep healing to occur. In this self-abidance, we begin to gain freedom from slavery to our inner issues because we no longer jump on every train of desire. The constricting knowledge is in the subtle body, and the desire-driven issues in the causal body begin to loosen their grip, facilitating the radical transformation of the ordinary body-mind into an instrument of divine will and action, resulting in a sense of spaciousness. This spaciousness originates in the chest area, the heart space, expanding into the whole being and outward into the world. In this heart space, time stands still. The primordial vibration of self reveals itself, and your desires reveal themselves to be a form of liberation. Events of daily life fall into place in an effortless rhythm while anxieties and fears melt away. What can we fear when we have absolute trust in divine's intentions? What can we fear when we have absolute trust in divine's intentions? Previously, we identified as a character in the movie that played upon the screen. Now we learn to disengage from the character and pay attention to the screen. Thank you. Have a great day. Gratitude for this day. Gratitude for our lives and health. Gratitude for all the opportunities to make life something magical. Love.